my dear sister in struggle, none other than Verheyden-Hilliard, who became
Good evening, sisters and brothers. I want to thank the organizers and all of you for coming here today at what is really a very critical moment. We're here to show practical, humanitarian, and political support for the people of Gaza. The massive bombing attack that started on December 27th and ended in January dominated the news, and it created global support for the struggle in Palestine. But the people today are still suffering the conditions of war. We need to make no mistake about it. The siege of Gaza, the blockade of Gaza, is an ongoing war. And this is a critical moment right now, too, because the U.S. government's attitude towards Palestine and to the Arab and Muslim world is on display. As many people saw, President Obama went to Cairo. And tens of millions of people, maybe more, were encouraged to tune in, to listen, all around the world to hear what he had to say, because it was an effort, according to the White House, for him to bridge the divide, to reach out to the Muslim world, to try and end, quote-unquote, hostilities. And I want to quote to you one line from what was a very lengthy speech, but I think it's a very important line. He said, "Just as Muslims do not fit a crude stereotype, America is not the crude stereotype of a self-interested empire." It's a very interesting formulation, and I want to take a minute to explore that. When we use the term stereotype, we think of a crude, false, prejudiced oversimplification that conceals reality. And I think we would agree President Obama is absolutely correct to say that the extreme bigotry and prejudice directed towards Muslim people is in fact a stereotype. But the idea that the United States, as a self-interested empire, is, at least from my view, entirely correct. It is not a crude stereotype. It is not a pejorative. It is not a falsehood. It is true. It is the United States that has 730 military installations in 120 countries. It is the United States that continues to occupy a part of Cuba, a part that was seized in 1899. It is the United States that invaded the Philippines. It is the United States that invaded Korea in 1950, where its troops still reside to this day. It is the United States that invaded Vietnam. It is the United States that invaded the Dominican Republic, Panama, Somalia, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq. No other country has the track record of the United States in recent history. And this level of interventionism is emblematic, definitive, of an empire. But let's take President Obama's speech at face value. He asserts that Muslims must not view the United States as a self-interested empire. So, Mr. President, there is one very simple, very distinctive, highly significant act that he could carry out right now, and that would go the furthest in changing the image of the United States in the Arab and Muslim world. He could say in no uncertain terms to that government in Tel Aviv, which exists with a $15 million a day subsidy from this government, he could tell them to immediately and without any further condition end the siege of Gaza. The people of Gaza are being starved, denied food, deprived of medicine, and access to energy resources, and this is happening for one reason only, because the United States government is allowing it to happen. No one should think for a second that the government in Tel Aviv, no matter how right-wing its current administration may be, could possibly stand up to the U.S. government if the U.S. government told them they had to stop. And we shouldn't kid ourselves. The imperialists in Washington are not afraid of the Israeli government. That's not why the siege is continuing. That's not why the settlements continue to be built all over the West Bank. That's not why thousands of young Palestinians remain jailed in Israeli prisons. It's not that Israel can't be stopped. Israel is a dependent regime. It is the largest recipient of U.S. military aid last year, for the last decade, for the last 6 decades. President Obama, many people who are careful observers of US foreign policy would never agree that the characterization that the United States is a self-interested empire is a crude stereotype. But if your speech was designed to find a new basis for a relationship with the Arab Muslim world, the most important thing would be for the US not to simply talk, not to simply use soaring rhetoric to discuss so-called universal human rights. The most important thing would be to take action, not tomorrow, but today, to save the children in Gaza, whose young lives are being extinguished every day, with and because of the immense financial and political and military aid provided by the US government to the criminals who are maintaining that siege. But there may be one element of Obama's speech that is right, of that line, that is right, and it's inadvertently true. When he refers to saying that the United States is not a self-interested empire, I think if we distinguish the US government from the people of the United States, we would say that that is true. The people of the United States are not served by this empire. The people of the United States are not the architects of this empire. We gain nothing from the killing and occupation of our brothers and sisters in the Middle East and in Palestine. In fact, it's the people of the United States and the people in this room right now that are the biggest threat to this empire. As more and more people learn the truth and stand up for justice, the empire weakens. When we refuse to bow to prejudice and propaganda and stand up for justice for the Palestinians, the empire weakens. Why do you think there's such an effort in the United States to attack and criminalize acts of humanitarian relief? How can bringing food and medicine to children who are dying be considered a terrorist act? It can't, because it isn't. It is political, it is purely political, and the use of the US government of the word terrorism in conjunction with anyone that is seeking to save the lives of children in Gaza defines everything you need to know about the use of that word by this government. Isn't terrorism about raining bombs down on people? Is it not terrorism to starve children? It is not terrorism to hold people at checkpoints and keep them from hospitals until they die? Is it not terrorism to use white phosphorus? Is it not terrorism to make children grow up terrified in a constant state of deprivation, with lost parents, with closed schools, in rubble, and the constant terrorizing sounds of planes overhead and bombs falling? Is that not terrorism? We know what terrorism is, and everyone who is here today is here because we are fighting that terrorism. When we look back, in history and at the progressive struggles in history, and the changes and the accomplishments that we all hold dear, it's very easy to look back at those things and think, but of course those had to be. How could any sane person not feel that equality and justice for all could not be? The struggle against Jim Crow apartheid in the South, the struggle for women's liberation in the United States, the struggle for labor in the United States, all of these things that are accepted at this point in time. At the time when people were engaged in the midst of that struggle, at each and every moment in that struggle, those people were demonized. Those people who were engaged in the struggle were ridiculed. Those people who were engaged in the struggle were threatened with arrest. They were threatened with brutality. They were subject to arrest. They were subject to beatings. But they kept struggling because they knew what was just. And when Palestine is free, and it will be free, and when the children of Gaza and all of historic Palestine live in peace, and when Christians and Muslims and Jews live in peace, and they will, and when the forces of occupation and imperialism are driven out, and they will be, and when the Palestinian right of return is fully realized and all the refugee camps are closed and displaced families have returned to their homes, we will look back at this time and you will know, you will remember that you stood up for what was right. You supported our brothers and sisters in Palestine against the threats, against the lies, against the demonization.